Hello. Welcome to the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. This is episode 7, and today we're going to depart from our typical 3-part show format to take a deep dive into copyright licensing. Copyrights are a multifaceted area that span legal and ethical aspects of worship services when you want to use audio or video works that somebody else created. It's a fairly complex area of law because there are many different types of licenses to protect the interests of various people and companies that contribute to publishing a creative work. It's so easy to misread or misunderstand the legal language, and so we've seen a lot of well-intentioned but inaccurate information out there. Well, we have a special guest with us today who can provide us with authoritative information to set us all straight. We're building a community that's now more than 300 strong and growing from 6 countries and 3 continents that I'm aware of. And the community is you, of course, coming from diverse locations, congregation sizes, and faiths. At the level we're working on, denomination is transparent. And I think that coming together like this is a beautiful thing. And it's your engagement that keeps it strong. So we've provided you with the means for interactive engagement all week long, day and night, with our Discord server. If you haven't already joined, there will be an invitation link in the Zoom chat window. You'll find targeted topic channels to engage in 24/7 discussion and 24/7 discussion and Q&A with our panelists and with each other. It's where you find future show agendas, past show recordings, and special announcements. It's also where we take questions during the live show, like right now. To ask a question, put it in the channel named Live Questions, which is under the category named Live Show. Speaking of questions, it's time for the question of the day. What is your biggest fear about hybrid worship? Look for the question of the day channel in the live show category and give us your answers. So, over the past 6 weeks, we've been focusing on the transition from virtual to hybrid ministry and congregational life, covering technical and non-technical issues alike. Very soon, we're going to shift our focus to production skills and techniques to help you present high-quality, engaging, and interactive webcasts. And we'll be offering opportunities to share your work so that we can see each other's progress. Now, you might ask, how do we decide what topics we talk about on each show? You might ask, so go ahead. I'm glad you did. The answer is we listen to you. We have a general outline for a 3-part show. We begin by discussing one of our established order of priorities for technical upgrades. And in the second segment, we'll explore a topic in more depth. Last week, we covered the differences between different cameras that you might use and how lighting enhances video imaging. What we do is we watch the Discord for your requests and discussions so that we can learn what issues are most pressing for you. So let us know how we're doing and what you'd like to talk about. We're even considering adding another day specifically for technical training. So let us know. Next week, we're going to discuss what conditions you might expect to find your equipment in after a year without any use. What procedures you can follow to reinitialize and revive your audio and video systems. They've been just sitting there for a year and haven't been powered on and haven't been used. If you have an audio mixer sitting on a desk without a dust cover on it, for instance, you can expect it'll need some cleaning out. So today on the panel, we have Joanna Lovell, who's known as J-Lo to us. She earned her CTS, which is Certified Technology Specialist degree, after working in the AV integration space for over 4 years. She's also a virtual content creator a choir director, a music minister, and an audio engineer. She collaborates with a number of churches up and down the East Coast, and she also created the Dreaming Tree Coffee House. JLo is also our question moderator and will introduce the rest of our panelists for us. JLo, take it away.
Hey, Marty. David O'Connor is from the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, PA, where he's the tech team coordinator, and he has a theater director background. He also currently works as an educator focused on self-directed education. Mark Plukas, wave Mark, from Franklin, Massachusetts, by day is the operations manager for an independent AV control systems programming company. Mark is also the technical director for Circle of Friends Coffee House at First Unitarian Universalist Society in Franklin, Massachusetts, and has been audio and tech support for his fellowship for years. Jay Paul is from Ellicott City, Maryland. By day, Jay is the national key account manager for a leading manufacturer of pro audio solutions. During his long career in audio, he has been out on the road as front of house sound engineer, as well as mixing live sound in some well-known casinos in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Jay is an AV support volunteer for the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia, Maryland, as well as audio engineer for the UUCC One World Coffee House. Crystal Vakes from Jacksonville, Florida, is our resident disruptor. Her myriad professional roles include writing, project management, consultancy, editing systems, admin, web development, and tech support. Currently, she's the technical consultant for the UU Church of Jacksonville, Florida, where she is assisting the congregation with transitioning to hybrid worship. Leo Mendel, joining us from London, is the founding director of a digital sports agency called Sotic. They've been delivering websites and streaming around the world for over 20 years, including the first ever live top European soccer match in 2001. Leo also advises synagogues on how to set up for live streaming of services and has produced over 70 live streams in the last year for Jewish organizations around the world. Last but not least, our host, Marty Atias, is from ATS Communications in Silver Spring, Maryland. He's been a media production and communications engineer for 45 years, first in New York City and then in Maryland. His production experience ranges from broadcast radio and television to the music recording and live performance, to network engineering and telephone communications. He's currently a consultant, systems design and integration engineer, a sound mixer and editor, and a digital-first conferencing consultant. He's also Unitarian Universalist. Full bios are also available on the Discord channel under panelist bios.
All right, how about a hand for our panelists? Thank you very much for your invaluable contributions. It's great to be here. And we have an open panel. Our panel is not fixed and closed. If you would like to contribute to the conversation, if you think you can add value or an alternate viewpoint, then please contact me on the Discord and I'll tell you how you can join us. As attendees, your microphones will be muted throughout the show until the post-show when we have an informal Q&A session when we can all talk together. Remember that we don't use the Zoom's chat feature, so as a reminder, if you want your question read, put it in the Discord channel named Live Questions. And we want our moderator to easily find your questions during the show, so all non-question comments and chats are welcome in the Discord channel named Live Chat, and we do read them throughout the show. And finally, if you're new to Discord and would like a tutorial, then let us know and we can schedule a time to walk you through it. Now, next week, we're going to return to the all-important topic of sound. We'll go into more detail about the technical needs for live streaming, and we'll talk about techniques to do better sound mixes. So ask all of your AV people to join us. Now, okay, so let's get into today's topic. We have, as guest speakers, we have Nate Scott, the Director of Publisher and Songwriting Relations for Christian Copyright Licensing International, or CCLI, as they are otherwise known. They partner and work closely with Christian Copyright Solutions, or CCS, so he's well-versed in the licenses available from both companies. He's worked with intellectual property and copyrights for the last 7 years, and outside of work, He serves his church's web worship team from the drum cage. And we have Deanna Rose with us, who is the operations manager for Christian Copyright Solutions, assisting churches with performance licensing. Before joining CCS, she worked with Integrity Music and Ministries, producing special events and educational experiences, and became immersed in copyright issues. She volunteers with her local church on the technology team. So, Nate, for anyone who's not familiar, tell us about your company and what they do.
Great. Thank you, Marty. I'm Nate Scott. I work for CCLI, as Marty shared, and we do licensing to churches. CCLI makes blanket licenses available to churches for a variety of rights similar to CCS. And so today I'm going to share with all of you just some basics about copyright. I know that you guys went into some PD and royalty-free content last week, and so hopefully I'm not hitting on the exact same stuff that you've hit. But for some, this might be the first time you've heard about copyright in a while, or it could be a review. So let's jump in. I'm going to try to share my screen, and we will talk about the basics of copyright law in the church. So today we'll cover the topics of what is copyright protection, what's included in that, which rights are exclusive to the content creator, author, artist, the person who owns the copyright. What is the religious service exemption? Many churches come to CCS or CCLI and point to the religious service exemption as basically the catch-all for the activities that they're doing. So we're going to unpack what is included in the religious service exemption and what is not included.
Nate, can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah.
If you're intending to share your screen right now, we're not seeing anything.
Well, that's not good. Let's try this. Can you see anything now?
Thank you. Yes.
My apologies, everyone. Hope I didn't ruin the broadcast, but okay. Can you see an agenda screen?
Yes.
Okay. We'll keep on going then. So we're covering what is copyright, what is the religious service exemption, and what are the common activities in the church that are not covered under the religious service exemption that may require additional licensing. So first off, what is copyright? Copyright is an exclusive intellectual property right given to the creators of original music, literary and dramatic works. Broadly, copyright protects by law any assets or legal interest. So copyright would protect reproduction, which would be making digital copies or photocopies or making a recording of a work. Covers display. This is a bit more of a, you'll see this with paintings, statues, video, photography, but it also applies in the church with music because there's lyrics. Lyrics could be displayed on a website or on a screen in some churches being projected to aid in congregational worship. We have performance, which is probably something we're all very familiar with inside the church and outside of the church. Performance being really just playing of a song, or in the dramatical area and dramas, it would be, once again, performing that work. If it was literary, then it would be just reading a poem or a story. But performance is a key element, and there's definite ties in to the religious service exemption, and we'll walk through that. Performance involves playing songs or sounds, recordings publicly in concert venues, on the radio, television, and through streaming services. Another right that is protected within copyright is distribution. That would be selling, leasing, giving copies of whatever it is away. That would fall under distribution. And then a final right is derivative works, creating, whether it would be a sound sample from an audio recording or taking a portion of a video. In music, it could be creating an arrangement or an adaptation, and also a translation. All of those are derivatives. The key thing here is that copyright protects the original creator. So they have the exclusive right when they create whatever it is to control these sort of activities. If I write something down on paper immediately in a tangible form, that is considered to be copywritten. If you were to record something with the audio, just the sound recorder on your phone, that would have copyright protection because it has been fixed to a tangible means. And by doing that, it doesn't mean that it does mean that I have rights that are protected. Marty can't come over and just take this sheet of paper and start giving it away, distributing it, or making copies of it and selling it. He wouldn't want to because these are just terrible notes. But even if he wanted to, that right is my right since I am the author and the creator of this content. Copyright exists to promote the progress of useful arts. Without protecting a work, then there isn't as much of an incentive to create the work. And we've seen cases where the value of works are watered down because they're being shared and there isn't compensation or any control. So I think we're all the benefactors of copyright law because there's great songs that are available that we purchase. We're happy to purchase, whether it's a monthly subscription or purchase tickets to go see a show or whatever the case, to consume copyrighted material. And without copyright protection, there's many who are able to devote their life to their craft that wouldn't be compensated for those works and the quality of content available to us in society. It would be watered down. And further, there is this moral element that we need to be thinking about, and that is, it is property. It's taking something and copying it without permission, displaying it, performing it, distributing it. That's basically stealing because it's someone else's property and you're taking that and doing something with it. So we think that there is an obligation to respect these sort of rights. How does copyright affect the church? Well, churches are increasingly using copyrighted material. We're using technology to create and distribute, display songs, service sheets, many other forms of content. I know you guys have talked about many of these forms of content. And churches are not exempt from copyright law. Even though many are nonprofit, we're going to jump right into the religious service exemption on the next slide. But as you'll see, we're not exempt from all copyright laws. There's actually just a couple rights that are very clearly exempt. So let's jump in to the religious service exemption and we can unpack what is in the U.S. copyright law. I apologize for those of you who are attending who are not in the United States, but I know that around the world there's very similar concepts. There's the Berne Convention, which allows countries to respect other countries, participating countries' copyright laws. But today I'm speaking specifically with the United States in mind because that's what I have expertise in. So in Section 110 of the U.S. copyright law, under the heading Limitations on Exclusive Rights, exemptions of certain performances and displays, it says the following are not infringements of copyright. Performance of non-dramatic literary or musical work, or of a dramatico-musical work of a religious nature, or display of a work in the course of a service at a place of worship or other religious assembly. So these activities are not infringements of copyright. If we focus in here, the key elements that apply to the church would be performance of a musical work. Now, if your congregation is using non-dramatic literary works, then great. Yes, you can perform it. You could read it. You can do a drama of religious nature, and that is allowed in a religious service. But specifically with CCLI and CCS, most of the queries involve performance of a musical work. So that performance, the playing of a musical composition or the playing of an audio recording, that is allowed within a service.
Now, Nate, can you expand on the non-dramatic part?
Non-dramatic, yeah, that would just be written works. So they're focusing. We have the drama element, and you'll see it focuses in on of religious nature. So if you had dramatic works that are not of religious nature, those are not exempt. And then on the non-dramatic part, it's opening it up to really all forms of literary works. It's not distinguishing between a sacred or secular literary work, just as it is doing the same with the musical works. But it does give a distinction on the dramatic or drama. And I'm not very well versed with that term, so I apologize if someone here is involved in plays and drama and I'm totally just messing that part up, but I think you get the feel for it.
Well, so does that mean that you can perform a song from a play, but you couldn't perform a scene from a play?
That's getting a little bit into the weeds. I think that if that song exists exclusively in that play, it's not going to be allowed because it's a part of the play. If it's a non-religious play. Okay. The other part of this that I wanted to kind of pull out or highlight for you is it says display of a work. And display, as I referenced before, paintings, photographs, even video. That seems a little bit more straightforward. But display of music, well, there is a tie-in here, and because we can talk about displaying lyrics in a service. The challenge with that piece is in order to display lyrics, there probably is a reproduction activity that's required. And the assumption here is that you could take this work and just display it. Maybe you could point a camera to this and then you could project it. That would be covered. But if I have to make a copy of this, whether it be digital or a physical copy to turn it into a transparency, that's a reproduction. And as you can see in the text here, we have the complete religious service exemption. It does not cover reproduction. So,
Nate, or a Google slide, is that a reproduction?
A Google slide, if you had the rights to use a Google slide and you could pull it directly into your presentation software, if you don't have to make a copy of it, then you could probably defend the fact that there's no reproduction.
Okay.
It's displaying. It's a royalty-free slide, or it's a slide that maybe I purchased, but I have the rights to show that. Then you would be covered. But normally with churches that are displaying lyrics, they have to make some sort of a reproduction to get it there. They'll have to copy the lyrics into another program from somewhere. And in most cases, they're going to have to either purchase lyrics. It's possible you could get it from the publisher's website where they offer it. But the irony is those lyrics are there on their website for you to consume. But if you copy them off, there is an expectation that reproduction is going to be reported through places like CCLI if it's used for church purposes. So you can see that the religious service exemption is quite narrow in scope, and that was the point that I'm trying to drive home here is there's a very limited display right, if you can find a way to pull it off without a reproduction. And of course you can perform songs, and we're all familiar with that element. But there's a lot of activity that happens outside of the service, and that's where we're going to go next. So here's some myths about the religious service exemption. There's this thought that all music played at church functions is exempt. Remember, the religious service exemption focuses on your services. So there's going to be music played maybe in some churches that we serve. It could be in the coffee shop or the bookstore, or maybe they're having events outdoors. They're having a picnic or an award ceremony, something that isn't a typical service. Well, that is not covered under the religious service exemption, because the religious service exemption focuses on services at the church, religious services, not events at the church. And we'll dive in a little bit more into a lot of the activities that occur at churches involving music in some of the later slides. There's a myth that performing or playing secular music requires separate licensing. If we're just focusing on the performance element, the band is playing a song maybe by memory. I only reference that because there might be sheet music that they're referencing, that there could be a reproduction there. But let's just say they're just performing a song by memory. It doesn't matter whether it is a sacred or secular song. We spent a bit of time on the religious service exemption, and it just said musical works. So you don't need a license for secular music when Christian or sacred music is exempt. That's not the case. It does not differentiate between the two. This is the third one here is a very common thought that has come up, and that is that just streaming music from services is exempt. We've seen a massive jump in churches streaming services during the current environment in COVID, and at the very outset, there were many questions and groups, by the way, that were approaching politicians to say we need to get streaming included in the religious service exemption. That didn't gain any traction. There isn't anything in the religious service exemption about a retransmission, which streaming is, or a distribution through a digital platform. So streaming is outside of the religious service exemption. Broadcasting services on TV or radio is exempt. Once again, didn't reference any of that in the religious service exemption. TV and radio stations end up getting their performance licenses through companies like ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. So that's very common. It's not exempt. If it's a religious service that's on a channel or a religious station, it still doesn't make any difference. TV and radio are not exempt. Licensing is required. Finally, there's many people that wish this were true. Posting services to YouTube and Facebook are exempt. I think the religious service exemption was written way before YouTube and Facebook were in the picture. And this is very similar to the streaming music bullet above, but it's just to kind of bring it home since it's a common question. Though you can post to YouTube and Facebook, and there's content ID matching systems that compensate rights owners. When you post content to YouTube or Facebook, technically you're checking a box to say that you own the underlying works. And it's under that assumption that they allow you to post content. And unfortunately, songs that you are not the copyright owner of, it would require additional licensing. YouTube and Facebook are not handling the licensing for you for streaming. So those are some of the myths. Real quickly, just to talk about blanket licensing versus individual licenses. CCLI and CCS both work in blanket licensing to the church. It is possible to approach directly a song owner or a publisher, administrator, the owner of the copyrighted work, and to secure rights to for whatever sort of activity you're doing. There's a variety of license types that you could purchase. One of the challenges today is that many songs are written with multiple owners. There's multiple contributors involved. In CCLI's world, it used to be that 30 years ago, their songs had a single songwriter. And you move forward to today, it's like every song has 5 songwriters, and things have these weird percentage splits. So it's a bit more of a challenge to secure all of the appropriate licensing just for an individual song. And if you're trying to do that on a regular basis, that's where blanket licensing is really helpful, because a blanket license allows churches to use a catalog of copyrighted works for one fee. You just have to ensure that all of the songs that you're using or the content that you're using is covered by that blanket license. We just hit on that second bullet. So now I'm going to transition into common reproduction activities that take place in the church and that are covered by a specific license. So making copies, whether digital or physical, of lyrics, printing songs, hymns, lyrics in bulletins, programs, liturgies, song sheets. We have to throw in in today's day, if you are making, if you are sharing, sending out copies of lyrics or song sheets, copyrighted material digitally, it most definitely applies as a reproduction. Recording services. This is separate really from streaming, though it's kind of lumped in, recording and distribution. But in CCLI's world specifically, before streaming was a thing, churches were recording their services, the music and the preaching, and making either audio cassettes available in the early days, and CDs and DVDs. It's a little bit less today, but under CCLI's license, they're able to create, to record and then make copies available to at least 15% of the congregation size. So recording worship services would fall into reproduction. Creating custom arrangements, I hit on derivative works, that right, that's exclusive to copyright owners. CCLI's license that covers reproduction does allow churches to create custom arrangements. Let's say you have a really good bagpipe player in your church, and you just can't find the right arrangement or a bagpipe arrangement for this song that you're going to use. If that original song is licensed with CCLI and there isn't a published version of the type of arrangement you need, you can create that arrangement. The rights still reside with the original rights owner, but you're able to use that and then report that activity. Keep in mind, without that license in place, technically you're not supposed to create an arrangement of a copyrighted work, period. So they're allowing that within the church worship expression, and also creating translations into other languages where that translation doesn't exist for a song. So all of these activities that I just shared fall under the church copyright license. That really was the foundation or the original product that CCLI built the company on over 33 years ago, I believe. It started with basic reproductions for transparencies, and it's grown, and over time publishers have made additional rights available for the translations and the arrangements and for recording. But most churches, actually it's probably 99% of the churches, let me hold on, I think every church that's licensed with CCLI has to have at least a CCL, a church copyright license. So if you're coming to CCLI, this is at least the first step. let's move on to performance rights. We hit on the fact that performing a song within a service is covered by the religious service exemption. Additional licensing is not required within the services. Public performance, it's considered a public performance if it's performed in a place open to the public or at a place where a substantial number of persons outside of a normal circle of a family and its social acquaintances is gathered. This applies very closely or aligns with many of the activities that are happening in churches that are not the normal service. So just to lay the groundwork that a public performance is in a place open to the public and basically outside of your normal circle of family and social acquaintance are gathered there. The main organizations that license public performance in the United States are ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. The Perform Music license is a license that CCS offers that it takes the rights from ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC and brings them into one. And through that, we represent, let's see, I think I have it on the next slide, and Deanna could help me out, but 28 million songs. So it's a very broad repertoire, whereas CCLI's repertoire is focused exclusively on church music, which would be 500,000 songs. But the Perform Music license with CCS covers all of the repertoire for ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. So it ends up being much broader. And the performance license grants permission to have public performance, whether it's in a live performance or pre-recorded music like an MP3, or even playing a CD or streaming a service such as Spotify. One thing to point out is that with churches, outside of services, they're treated the same way with public performance as stadiums, coffee shops, bowling alleys, restaurants. So they have to secure the same sort of rights as those institutions would in order to perform or play audio from the many recordings that are out there. That's why a Perform Music facilities license is required in many scenarios. So it gives churches the flexibility and the freedom to perform more than 28 million Christian and secular songs anywhere in your facilities and satellite campuses. It covers things like cafes and bookstores, concerts that would be held at the church facilities, the on-hold music that might be playing over the phone system when folks call into the church, retreats, picnics and barbecues, graduations and awards ceremonies, dance and exercise classes, sporting events. Some churches have like intramural leagues that they'll hold, and it would sure liven things up if you had some nice music to play while everybody's waiting around during a timeout or before or after during warm-ups. Fundraisers, conferences and seminars, vacation Bible school and camps. And then for movie nights, playing a motion picture in a service is going to require separate licensing. There's a thing called the church video license that grants rights to play motion pictures and other content as long as it's covered under that license. But what I'm referring to here is the music that you might play at the beginning before that main event happens, the main picture is played, or afterwards. So that's just to give you an idea of the many types of activities that are conducted in churches that do not fall under the services sort of grouping that the religious service exemption allows. Okay. I'm going to take a moment here, take a breath. We're getting to the main topic that I'm sure some of you are most interested in. If I've lost any of you, I apologize. Give yourself a little bit of a slap to wake up. We're going to talk about streaming now, which is a very hot topic in the church today. We've seen massive growth in churches at both CCS and CCLI with church streaming over the last 12 months. And churches are live streaming their services. They're posting them in locations for on demand afterwards, and there's just generally an expectation that you could watch a service live, or you could pull it up at a later time and view it on demand. Both of these would be considered retransmission of the original performance that happened in the church, that once again is exempt from licensing. So in the church, you're covered when you're performing that, but then you retransmit it. It could be live, you're transmitting it, but it's not the original, and it's a live stream, or after the live stream, it's available also on demand. These are activities that are covered by the WorshipCast streaming license. So it allows your church to legally stream live or on demand your performances of copyrighted music, including worship services and special events, from your church website. And that's the key. This license, it's your church website that is licensed. The agreement is between the PROs basically and that URL, your domain. You can also use content delivery services like Vimeo or YouTube, but in those cases, that video can't be publicly listed. You're using the content delivery service so that it can be visible and consumed on your church website. It covers the same 28 million songs that the Perform music license covers that we referenced just a moment ago. And it covers a wide array of church-sanctioned events that you might want to stream, not just the service. Another option that's available for streaming offers live streaming on demand, just the same, but also the rights to post to third-party platforms, such as YouTube, Facebook, and Vimeo. But I will say that there can be challenges when you post your content to third-party platforms when you are not the content owner. You can also make your services available through podcasts. That's the church streaming license that makes this possible. This option is through CCLI. Posting to third-party platforms it's a hot topic. Everybody wants to post their services to YouTube. And the challenge that we face today is that both YouTube and Facebook have content ID systems that will take the audio from your stream and match it to the underlying composition that's been registered by the publisher. And many times if they match it, you're allowed to continue to have that video posted or to have it live, live distributed. But you'll get a notification as a church or YouTube account, whatever it's under, to say that we've made a match. We've matched your video or some of the content in your video to published content. Not to worry, it's connected now, but just so you know, the owner may place ads on this video since they're the owner. And what happens in these scenarios is that churches sometimes dispute these claims because they believe that they are the owner of the video. You may own the pastor who shared the message, created an original sermon. So he owns that whole portion. That's not the disputed piece, but the underlying music composition is something that if you post it there, there's a high probability that it will be matched. And then there's the possibility that the content owner, the publisher, would either have you take it down. More likely it would be that ads could be placed on the video. This is even more common when you introduce in master recordings into the stream. So there's just challenges on third-party platforms because ultimately you're not in control of the experience for the end user. There's a possibility on Facebook that stream could be muted because it's identified too much copyrighted content within the stream audio, and it'll just mute the audio. It's not quite as enjoyable of an experience for those attending if they can't hear anything. Vimeo ends up being a great third-party platform since they don't have the same content ID systems that will do the matching. but of course Vimeo isn't as popular as YouTube, and it seems many churches want to post their services to YouTube or Facebook. So it is covered under this streaming license, the right to do it. Publishers have said we're licensing you the right as a church to post to third-party platforms, but in the end, the rights to this license, the church streaming license, do not override the terms of conditions for YouTube or for Facebook or whatever platform you're placing those videos on. And if there's a conflict, since you're placing it in their environment, their terms override. If they decide that they don't want that content on that platform, even though you've purchased a license and have the right to post that, to reproduce that content and distribute it on third-party platforms in this sort of way, ultimately they can say, no, we don't want that here. So that's why we always say that posting to the church's website is probably going to be the best experience because you have the most control. There isn't the risk of ads and takedowns and muting of your audio feed. Another layer to throw in that has just become an option since January is the ability to put sound recordings in your stream. So this includes master recordings, just the normal audio that you would hear from a song that's on Amazon or on Pandora or Spotify, Apple Music. That would be a master recording, just a flat audio file. It's also on CDs and records and cassette tapes. That the original would be considered a master recording, and the right to distribute that through a streaming platform is included in the streaming license that I'm sharing with you here. Master recordings would be relevant during countdown timers at the beginning of a service, maybe transitions, announcements. There could be a closing section where you also want to just liven things up at the end. Churches are using master recordings in their streams before this license was available, but this is a way of actually having the licensing to do it now, and many churches are taking advantage of that. It also allows the ability to include multi-track stems, backing tracks, accompaniment tracks that are used during the actual performance, you could say. That's covered under this new license as well. Churches are they're picking up or purchasing these sort of multi-tracks from Loop Community, multi-tracks, praise charts, worship backing band, and many other locations. So if it's a multi-track that you didn't create, where you don't own the underlying master recordings, you need a license like the Streaming Plus license with CCLI to license that activity. This option here includes the rights to the composition that I showed you in the previous slide. So you can perform the composition by itself, but you could also include multi-tracks or master recordings, all of these elements during your church's stream. One key point to throw in here, this option also applies to third-party platforms or podcasts. So the same sort of options are in play with Streaming Plus.
So let's try and clarify that a little bit.
Yeah.
So give us some examples of what a master recording is.
What's a great song that you might use? There's a song called "Reckless Love" that has been popular in some of the churches that we served maybe a year ago. If you were to source that song, that audio recording legally, you could include it in your stream. I think today it would be very common for the AV department to have Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music pulled up on a computer that's connected to their system, and they would just push play on that track. And obviously, it has to be that master recording would need to be available and registered with CCLI. And so there's a validation that's involved, but you're basically pushing play on it and including it in your stream.
So that would be somebody else's copyrighted work, right?
Yeah, it would be their recording. So it's not just a copyrighted musical composition, but it's a copyrighted master recording of that composition.
Now, does it have to be their own composition, or can it be a cover song?
It could be a cover song. So let's say you created a cover of a popular song. Well, the underlying song that musical composition would need to be covered. If we assume that you've got the rights that you needed to create your recording, sometimes there might be mechanical licensing in play, but if you own that master recording, you're the creator of it, you control the rights to it, you wouldn't need CCLI's license for that streaming of the master recording part for your cover, but you'd still need it for the underlying composition, because the rights for that song or for the composition belong to a separate entity. The streaming license would cover that. Bottom line is it'll cover either scenario. If you're playing a master recording, it would either have to be something that you own and you control the rights for. And once again, when I say you own, in this case, I'm saying you are the creator, the original, you own the intellectual property for it. Or it could be someone else's master recording, and you're reporting that in the process.
All right. So let me see if I got this straight. So if we have a WorshipCast license,
Okay.
that gives us the right to record somebody else's composition
Yes,
and play that on a stream.
that's it.
And now that becomes our master recording. Is that right? Okay. And now, do we have the right to then let other people use our master recording?
No.
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 Okay. But we can use our master recording.
You can include it. You're allowed to create that master recording just for that stream, though. The WorshipCast is just licensing it's essentially a master recording for that stream. You can't use it outside of that purpose on your church website.
But we can make it available for somebody to play back at another time?
No.
No.
No. Deanna, if you want to jump in on any of these sort of nuances, feel free. But yeah.
I was going to inquire about that. So if it's for WorshipCast and you've made a live production, or you've created a live event, you've sung the song, and you've made it available on your website, you streamed it live, it can be retransmitted. They can go back in and rewatch that at any time.
Mm-hmm. But it's just in that form.
Right. You can't manipulate it. You can't take it into post-production and manipulate it and make it anything else. It's a retransmission of a live performance. That's the short end of that.
And the reason the rights are limited because the intent is just it's a retransmission of that original event. Right. Whether the person on the other end is seeing it live or they're pulling it up on demand, it is that exact same experience. It hasn't been changed, and it may have been a wonderful performance, but in order for that church to pull out that performance and do something with just the audio from that, they'd have to go to the owner of that composition and work out the mechanical rights.
Perfect. Thank you.
Crystal had a question, Marty.
Well, then go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Uh-oh. Oh, no. Okay. Cut to somewhere else.
There we go.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I was host muted, so I couldn't unmute myself. I want to make sure I'm completely understanding this, and I think I understand where Marty was going with this originally. So you're saying you can't do anything with it, like in regards to post, and it needs to be a production of a live event. I'm under the impression that we could record, and I want to make sure we're clear on this, that we could record, like, say, we have a socially distant singer and we have a socially distant pianist, and they send their tracks in to somebody who has a DAW, and somebody with a DAW creates a track which is then produced or played, performed live during a service, which is then streamed. That's my question. Is that okay, or is that not? Because if not, we get a bunch of virtual choirs that are not kosher.
So real quick, I'll speak to the CCLI side and the current environment. Currently, what you described is happening a lot. Publishers are well aware of it. They're allowing it. It's because of the current environment that we find ourselves in. And publishers, for the most part, are saying we don't want to hinder this creativity and the ability for these services to continue, the ability for choirs to perform. So they said that's fine. What we don't know is once we're out of this and normal services resume, whether there will be less of a turning of the, looking the other way, because the original intent of the CCLI streaming license is that it takes a live performance in a venue and then transmits it out. That's it. There isn't a record it here, but that's a necessity today in many cases, and they're allowing it. I'm not a rights owner, so I don't know what their internal discussions are regarding this dynamic. So I think we'll see, but we'll get to a point where either that those sort of activities will need to be clarified. They'll have to be clarified in the terms of agreements that are shared with churches so that there's clarity that they can continue to do this, or it's not an option and a different type of sync license would be required. With CCS, Deanna can speak to the original intent in those licenses, but you have these third parties in place, being the PROs, who manage the rights for the publishers, and so they can be probably a bit more restrictive and pedantic with the rights. And you have to be very careful, because anything outside of what is explicitly stated in the terms of agreement that you have for a performance, or actually in this case a worship cast license, you're just on your own as a church. And if a content owner were to identify that performance and say, hey, hold on, this is outside, this is a gray area, we're going to pursue it, I think it's $150,000 for each infringement that you could be liable for as a church. So it definitely falls in a gray area, and I can confidently say in the current environment with CCLI, they're well aware, they're allowing it to continue. But once we're through this and we get into some more normalcy, it will be interesting to see whether the terms change in these agreements, or if they just allow it to continue, because there is an awareness that it's happening.
So it sounds like we need to contact our elected officials regarding this. Appreciate that. With regard to CCS, is it that does the CSAC PR or CSAC ASCAP BMI and the secular works? This was kind of what Marty was getting at. And I apologize for jumping back, but bear with me here for a moment. If we were to find a recorded work, like say someone's released a cover in Creative Commons that they allow you to use, and we have paid for the CSAC BMI ASCAP license, or is that a kosher? Is that again performance?
Deanna, I'm looking to you. I have an idea, but you're a better bet.
Well, no, but you're talking here about a sound recording. Is that correct?
Correct. Like I'm finding a master recording, like I've paid you for the license to have the right to use ASCAP, BMI, CSAC.
For the composition.
Right, correct. So I'm going to go credit that when I use it so that the original author gets paid, but I find like say Marty has put out an awesome cover of, like, say, Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, and I want to use that, and he's released it CC. Can I then use that?
Well, in fact, if any sound recording, a Beatles tune, Bob Dylan, if you went and got individual licensing, which is what you're talking about doing, whether Marty requires you to make any type of payment for that, if you get individual licensing for the ability to use that sound recording, then of course you can stream that.
Yep.
So basically the WorshipCast license is covering the underlying composition, and then you've gone and gotten additional licensing, so to speak, or permission, as it were,
Yep.
to use that sound recording.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are the two clarifications I was curious about with regard to, like, say, performance versus pre-recorded mass recording. Thank you.
So, Nate, you've mentioned a few things about copyright publishers looking the other way, and I've heard some things that I want to try. I've been trying to get clarification on. Have there been any modifications to copyright law, accommodations that have been documented that have an expiration date?
Not that I'm aware of.
Me
So
neither.
they're quite old and they've stayed the same. There haven't been any modifications. The most recent changes in copyright would involve the Music Modernization Act, but that's totally separate from this. But those are the most recent changes in this sort of industry that we could point to, but nothing relating to these underlying rights that we're talking about have been modified in recent memory.
Okay, thanks. Well, we kind of got you a little off track. We have a lot of questions building up, but I want to give you the opportunity to finish your presentation too.
I feel like I probably muddied the waters there towards the end, and thank you for helping me to get it sifted out and cleared up. Really briefly, just at the end here, I'm not even going to bother. Actually, I will share my screen just so you can see the final screen, which gives some information. Let's see if I can do it on my first try this time. I will hit the share button. There we go. Can you see a shared screen again?
Looks
We
good.
do, yes.
Okay. The key questions, if you were thoroughly confused with the three options for streaming, the point of this fourth slide is to give you a little bit of guidance. So you have to look at where you're streaming. If you are exclusively using your church website as the location that people would go to find that stream, either license is going to work at that point. But that's a key question, where are you streaming from? Because if you're looking for third-party platforms, maybe you're already using YouTube or Facebook and Vimeo, and you've worked through the challenges, and it seems like a great option for you, then the right option in that scenario, since you're using third-party platforms and we've established that licensing is required for that activity, then CCLI's streaming license or Streaming Plus would be the best option for you, depending on whether you're using master recordings that require licensed rights. That determines whether you do just the streaming license or Streaming Plus. Other factors to consider: what types of events are you streaming? The CCLI Church Streaming License and Streaming Plus, it's focused on services, so to speak, services at the church. The types of events that we covered for WorshipCast, it's a bit broader. You could definitely see yourself doing a stream of a award ceremony or a wedding, or any of those sort of events that would be outside of the service, but are church sanctioned events, and that video feed is going to be hosted on that church website that you have licensed through WorshipCast. So depending on the type of events, that will help you to frame in your decision. What are the catalogs of music that you're going to be using? If you're focusing just exclusively on more Christian music, then CCLI's licenses cover Christian. But if it's a bit more broad of a catalog that you'd like to use. And it could be that there's patriotic songs, there's Christmas songs that aren't considered Christian songs that are licensed to CCLI. You could have country music that you want to include. The Worshipcast license is definitely going to have a broader repertoire of songs available. And then finally, we've talked about master recordings a little bit. If you're using those, the option is exclusively Streaming Plus. I apologize that I don't have a grid that has check boxes here, because that would be the perfect option for you to see and to compare, but I at least wanted to identify the 4 key questions that you could ask, and then you could do some scribbling on paper. You know, once you put it on paper, it's copyrighted, so it's yours. Whether there's value with that sort of work, that's for you to decide. Next steps, if you're interested in finding out more about the different licenses that are available, the best way would be just to visit the respective websites, christiancopyrightsolutions.com for Worshipcast and Perform Music, ccli.com for the copyright license, Streaming Plus, Rehearse, which I didn't cover, and Song Select, which is a sheet music distribution service. I think that's it. So I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen, and I'm sure there's going to be many more questions.
Oh, yeah. What do you think,
Oh, that was
Marty?
great. Thank you so much. Yeah, we do have a number of questions, questions that were written in advance, and a bunch that are building up here live. So I'll hand it off to JLo.
So I'm going to go back in the layers of questions. Can you all help me find out what the first question is? I believe it's from Molly. Is that correct? Molly Farrow from Evansville, Indiana, asks, what licenses, where, and when, and how do they need to be included in the Sunday services live or recorded videos posted to YouTube or Facebook? And I would add, how do you include those into the order of service?
The last part there, the order of service, can you explain?
So that would be the PDF that's available while we're streaming live, or the physical printed paperwork that you use when you enter the sanctuary. Does does your license need to be denoted in that document somewhere?
Oh, well, let's see. I grabbed on a couple things that you were sharing there that led me to believe that CCLI's licenses would be the options in these cases, because there's reproduction activity that's happening, at least for the reproduction of lyrics. Let's say you're putting lyrics in an order of service. If you're displaying lyrics, one thing we didn't cover, if you're displaying lyrics, there is a requirement that you include a copyright notice. You give credit. It shows a CCLI license number, the title of the song, the authors, and the copyright information. That's a requirement on CCLI's side for the church copyright license for reproduction activity. If you're using Worshipcast and you're streaming, there isn't any sort of a display requirement there. But if you're displaying lyrics in your stream, which you can do under the church streaming license, that's a reproduction of those lyrics again. So you would want to include that information just like you would when you're displaying in a physical environment: title, CCLI license number, copyright notice, and the contributors. As far as putting that in a order of service, if the lyrics were included, then you want to have it there as well.
So that was my own question at the end of Molly's question. So to make sure that her question is answered.
Yep.
I believe her question is simply about the streaming service at all. So it needs to say so in the streaming service as well, correct? It needs to say this is licensed by CCLI, or what language is that is used.
Yeah, it's a CCLI. I could pull up the terms, and I know there's been confusion in this regard, but I think it's connecting the dots to realize that it is a reproduction that's taking place, and the reproduction activity is under the church copyright license, even if it's on a stream. I'm going to pull up the terms of agreement for CCLI so that I can see exactly what we've put there. But it says CCLI number sign and then your license number. You're going to have the song title, the authors of the song, and then the copyright notice, which just could be copyright 2021 J-Lo's music.
Okay. Should I go on to the next question, Marty?
Yeah, are you looking? Where are you looking?
I'm in the live questions category.
Live questions. So the earliest one I see goes back to Tay Moss. Today it's 7:05, maybe earlier. No, that's it. What are you using to generate? Not that one. Let's see.
Right. So yeah, she's got a
it
later
was
one.
Molly. Yeah, very good. What about the early questions, the advanced questions? Do you have those up?
I do not. Sorry.
Does Crystal have those?
I see one that says we purchased the CCLI Streaming Plus license for our live stream. It covers pre and post service, and we're wondering what we're allowed to play with that, not be in danger of copyright infractions. Is Spotify, Apple Music playlist okay, or a drama or special song in service covered since we have the license for streaming or no? So you have to have the Streaming Plus license. And she actually, before I say that, she finished off by saying we don't want to be flagged by YouTube or Facebook and don't want to violate any copyright laws. So you can still get flagged by YouTube or Facebook, even though you've secured the appropriate rights. That's the challenge with posting to those third-party platforms. But you want to validate that the master recording that you're using is covered under the Streaming Plus program. The easiest way to do that today as a license holder is to go into our reporting site and actually do a search for that recording and see if that version exists. If it's available to report it, then you could use it. You could bring it in from any legal source that you've gotten it from. So Spotify would be okay, but we don't stipulate in the terms where you source it from. It's the fact that that master recording, which you would not be able to tell a difference, though some of you audiophiles might be able to tell the difference between whether it's Spotify or Pandora. It's the same master recording, so it doesn't make a difference what the source is as long as it's legitimate and you've legally sourced it.
Great, thanks. That clears up a lot. Next question is: if your broadcast is only intended for use and viewing from by people in your own congregation, does that make any difference to streaming copyright law? Do you still need to buy the license?
So our license does not specify this use case, and I saw the explanation that was given along with this, how a lawyer had jumped in and explained that they felt like this scenario was covered since some churches are doing a Zoom session and they might be putting a password on it so only the congregation can get in to that event. But to be clear, that scenario is not allowed outside of the streaming license with CCLI. I can see why it would be accepted, and a lawyer would say, I think you're covered in this case because there isn't an option to do the in-person and you found the best option. But still, if I'm looking at CCLI's agreements or CCS's agreements, there isn't a provision for doing that sort of activity without having a license. So you're kind of on your own is what I'm getting at. In this case, you're not purchasing the license, and it's totally clear why it makes sense. But since it's outside the bounds of a license and the terms of a license, you're on your own since you haven't purchased protection. And it comes to whether you can defend that. This lawyer that this church brought in seemed that it would be very defensible, but you have to defend that with the content owners and see whether they agree.
All right. Another advanced question. Verify or differentiate. CCS covers streaming on our website, but not on Facebook or YouTube. Is that correct, first of all?
Correct.
And share what you can about why, considering that one license does cover those sites as well.
Yep. The agreements with those PROs are for your domain. It's for a specific website. They're not licensing YouTube. They're not licensing Vimeo. They're licensing yourchurch.com or whatever the URL is. It's specific to that.
What is
if
the
you
PRO, Nate?
Performing Rights Organization,
Okay. thank you.
ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. Thanks for that. But those agreements, they just stipulate it's for a specific URL. That's what the license is for. One license has a bit broader of an option where you could use third-party platforms. CCLI's streaming license, that's also the ability to license or stream to third-party platforms, is a provision in CCLI's. It's just, there's a trade-off here. If you need the larger repertoire and you found a way to successfully stream your services to YouTube or to other third-party platforms, then you've got to decide which option is more important.
Yeah, the other, just a caveat here, I think Nate mentioned earlier, is if you use Vimeo as a content delivery network or content delivery platform, that's where an embedded player would be on the church's URL, the church's domain. And so when the parishioner came in to view it, it would be viewed right there on the church's website, but the storage is actually in Vimeo, and that eliminates the church from having to maintain that storage. Of course, they do pay for that service.
One additional thing really quickly to throw in is one license. They are a content owner and a licensor. So they're in a very unique position where they've decided to grant those rights to make their works available on these third-party platforms. It's very easy for them to license those rights in their agreements to churches. So CCLI doesn't own any of the content, neither does CCS. But that may be one of the reasons why it's a little bit more broadly, because they have the ability to provide those additional rights.
That's a huge point. Being the content owner or not being the content owner or just the licensor.
And they have a different repertoire. So you have to keep in mind that one license, it's their repertoire. So there's just trade-offs.
Right. You have to find what works for your congregation.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully you find a sweet spot where you've got the repertoire that you want and you can post it in the locations where you want to.
Okay. So what about displaying copyright information on the screen when live streaming?
Yeah, that's what I tried to cover during the first question where I jumbled everything together. But I know that within CCLI, there have been times when answers have been given to say it's not a requirement. The fact is you're doing a reproduction. We talked about recording, talked about distribution. Streaming is a reproduction. Since you're reproducing, in this case, either the lyrics or you are most definitely reproducing the song in the form of a recording, then providing the copyright notice on screen would be required. And it's the same requirements that you would have in the physical location. And it also helps those who are viewing that stream. Many times they would wonder, what song is this? Or who are the songwriters? They might want to reference it at a later time. If you don't put that information there, then they're going to have that question. I understand the CCLI license number is not something that anybody's really looking for, but that is part of the requirement. And that's exclusively to CCLI. Once again, Worshipcast, there isn't an option to display lyrics, so there isn't a need to display the copyright information.
All right,
Are there any more advanced questions, Marty?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, are there more from your list?
No, that's about it.
Oh, great. Okay. So some of this might have been covered already, but it's worth mentioning again. So Deborah Mensch asks, if we broadcast a work in a Zoom service that is not streamed to YouTube, Facebook, etc., and the work does not appear in a recording that outlasts the Zoom meeting, what is the copyright obligation?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. If we broadcast a work in a Zoom service that is not streamed to YouTube or Facebook, and the work does not appear in a recording that outlasts the Zoom meeting, what is our copyright obligation?
Unfortunately, that would just fall under the live streaming sort of bucket.
Because, but Zoom is not being streamed out onto the internet. I get, well,
It still
I
is.
guess that's the begs the question: is Zoom actually streaming?
Zoom would technically be a streaming platform of some sort. I know we could debate the differences between a YouTube and a Zoom. Well aware, but in CCLI's environment, as we've spoken with publishers, they've felt like Zoom is a third-party platform similar to a YouTube or something like that. But it's not the original event. You're taking that original performance and you're retransmitting it live into a Zoom environment, but you're just not making it available to be viewed on demand at a later time. It's a gray area, but I would advise caution and consider a streaming license.
Can I ask about a subtlety there? Is like, I mean, sometimes, there's Zoom, which is rebroadcasting an event that's happening in church. Right now, what we're doing is like, what's happening on Zoom is the event. It's not a rebroadcasting of anything.
Yeah, and I think those are the sort of scenarios that publishers are recognizing today. But ultimately, CCLI or CCS, since that specific scenario is outside of our agreements, it's not perfectly clear. And if I try to line it up, it is aligning with a streaming activity. In the current environment, you're probably going to be just fine because it's not being made available. What publishers don't want is that those works are being reproduced and distributed, made available broadly, and there isn't any licensing. And I understand that that's not happening in this scenario. But if you're following the letter of the law, that scenario is not listed as an approved behavior, so to speak, in the religious services exemption or in a church copyright license if you had one of those. So you're kind of in no man's land in that regard. You're probably safe during the current environment due to the circumstances, but once again, that's between you and the content owner, and it's just a liability, and is it defensible?
Thanks.
I wish I had positive and happy answers for some of these, but I'm just trying to give my best opinion that I can.
All right, next question.
Hang on one second. Did you ask this from Catherine Spinella already, Marty? She would like some examples of non-literary dramatic works.
Oh,
she's a librarian and teaches copyright, and she does not understand what that term is, non-literary dramatic work.
Did it say? I thought it was non-dramatic literary works.
Yeah, I think they're reversed. Non-dramatic literary.
I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't dove deep into what they're talking about here, but they're focusing on something that is just a literary work. That it could be a book. You're reading out of a book, you're reading a poem. Could be then a drama that could be in the form of literature, but it's something that would be acted out. It's dramatic. Or you have musical works, which has been the main thing that we've spoken about today. I'd encourage you to look up non-dramatic literary work and see if the U.S. Copyright Office gives a clear definition. But that's how I would break it down, and focusing on dramas, there's written works that are not dramas.
And like play licensing works very different than like book licensing, or like you buy a book, or you buy a poetry magazine.
Yeah.
But a play, there's two things. You can buy the printed script, but then you also buy a ticket to the performance of the play. And a production of a play is a much different entity than the script.
Yep.
Right. So I think it's like referring to that.
Yeah.
It's using a quote from that poetry in a sermon.
I think that's free game.
What do you mean?
And that would be completely acceptable. Poetry, non-dramatic literary works do include poetry, textbooks. We would even say reading the Bible would be one of those literary works.
Okay.
So absolute novels, reading those.
What they're trying to do is say that dramas that are not religious in nature are not exempt from copyright law. So whether whoever it was who spoke there brought up an interesting scenario where there could be different rights for the script versus the actual drama. But in this case, I'm kind of thinking of them as the same thing. If it is a script for a drama, it's the written form, they're probably excluding that. And because let's look at music, they're talking about the composition, whether it's being displayed, that sheet music, or the lyrics. They're talking about how it's being displayed, but also performed. So you could probably tie that into a script, whether it's being performed for a drama or being displayed.
I see Crystal's hand up. And you're still muted, Crystal?
I do apologize. I do actually have some experience with regard to this one. Most publishers of, like, say, children's books, poetry, what have you, have put COVID permissions for read alouds that are allowed to be transmission. They are on the publisher's sites. Please check the publisher's sites. You are in a gray area otherwise, and it's not because of the church. The church law governs, as I'm given to understand it, talking to lawyers, the actual performance on site. It does not cover the transmission. So as soon as you transmit, you are performing to a remote location. That is not covered. You need to check with the publisher. So that's you're in a gray area. Be careful. Check the publisher sites. Most publishers do have COVID exceptions through the end of, I believe it's June this year. But, and if you go to the HTMF or HMTF, Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum resource site we put out earlier, I link to a lot of the publishers. So, and I give a blurb on how to do that. So look there.
Similarly, with music, many of the Christian publishers allowed gratis licensing for sound recordings during COVID, but some of those are expiring now that there is a new Streaming Plus license that's available. So it's great to hear that there was a similar feel on the publishing side with children's books and other literary forms, because what you're describing is streaming, and they're making an exception for that. That's fabulous.
So here's a question from Deborah Mensch, and this is a multi-part question, so I'll break it up. She wants to license a choral work for a virtual choir video. It has an original composer, an arranger, and maybe a publishing company. Does she need a sync or mechanical license from each of the above?
I think you're going to need the sync license for sure. But let's see, publishing.
Now, let me further break that down. For a song that is covered in your catalog, first of all? And then she asked, what about a song that's not covered in your catalog?
Yeah, if it's not covered in our catalog, you definitely have to connect with the publisher. Or let's see, we're talking about creating an audio recording or audio video. You'd have to connect with the publisher. If it's covered in ours, that's one of those gray areas that we've been talking about. If you're creating it today in the COVID environment to be a part of a service, that was the type of activity we were talking about that's being allowed. I don't think you're going to find it written anywhere though. But outside of the current environment, if you're going to piece together different members of the choir, however you're going to do it, it's going to be sync for sure. Deanna, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Just,
Deanna, go ahead.
I was just going to say, absolutely would need, you would be at that juncture, if it's something that you're individually licensing, you're creating a product, whether you're just streaming it or whether you would put it on a CD or DVD, you are now creating a product. So you would have to license it just like you would a full on CD or DVD. So at that juncture, you would have to go to the independent or individual owners and get licensing and sync licensing, mechanical and sync.
Many times you could they just say, what exactly are you doing? And then they would walk you through the licensing that's required. Mm-hmm. So the step would be to identify the owners or the publishers of that specific work that you're going to use, and then contact them and find out what they'd require.
So between all of the different entities, the composer, the arranger, the publishing company, etc., can you buy a single license that, from a PRO that covers all of them, or might they have to go to 3 different companies?
You're going to end up probably having multiple rights owners you're going to have to connect with.
Because remember here, in this particular case, you're not going to go to the performance rights organizations. You're going to go directly to the rights owners or whoever represents them, their publisher or administrator. So if the song is written by 5 different people, you would go to 5 different rights owners. They may all be in one place. They may have one administrator, but it would be 5 different rights owners that you would have to get permissions from. And typically when you're talking about an arrangement, that would also be included. You would go, that would be probably included from that rights owner as well.
So you want to choose your music carefully.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is there a difference between people actually singing a song on screen or using some other visual imaging as the video that accompanies a performance?
Well, it comes down to that video that you're showing, who owns it, who's the intellectual property owner.
Wouldn't it be the creator of the video?
Yeah. So
or would it be the creator of the song?
I think the question relates to sync licensing. Is there a difference between a completely unrelated video, visual image, and somebody actually singing the song on screen?
No, sync licensing, it's just the marrying of the audio with a video. You're purchasing a license so that you can take that audio and marry it to video, whether it's someone who's lip syncing it, someone who is actually physically singing it, or some beautiful motion background that has lyrics and all of that. Sync would apply in all 3 cases.
Right.
All right. J-Lo, you have another one for us?
Another one in the box about a different kind of service at the church. So there's a cover band that does not have a relationship with ASCAP, BMI, etc. is retransmission of one of their performances at a coffee house covered by one of these licenses? And which license?
Okay, so they're a cover band, but they're playing.
Doing a cover.
So they're playing covers. They're playing other folks' works. Who, in order for them to receive performance royalties from public performances, which a coffee shop would fall under, they have to register with ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. That coffee shop has to what was that?
Does the band have to register, or the coffee house has to register?
The coffee shop, the venue, has to have the appropriate licensing for those songs to be performed there, which can seem confusing. But if you attend an event at an arena, and let's say Aerosmith is playing at that arena still has to purchase performance licensing from if Aerosmith songs are covered in different ways by all three PROs, they would have to purchase licensing from all three PROs to support and legitimize the public performance of Aerosmith songs in that venue.
Well, I think the complicating factor is that that venue is still the church.
Okay, so if it's the church, then that's where the Perform Music license comes into play, because you've got the rights for all three PROs, and it's a cover band, so we're assuming that the songs that they're playing are registered with those PROs. There's 28 million songs to choose from. I assume that they could figure out a few that would be covered. So they'd be good.
With a license, they would be good.
With the Perform Music license.
With the Perform Music license. Okay.
All right. Yep. Here's an add-on to that. If a church has a Perform Perform Music license, is that portable? Can they perform somewhere else under that license?
No, it's for their facilities, their general premises. It could be, of course, indoors or outdoors, but they're licensing the facility.
One caveat to that is if the church is sanctioning a satellite campus. Sometimes they even have satellite campuses at the assisted living facility down the street. And so if they go to the assisted living facility and perform there, then it's a sanctioned function of the church.
Could we make Rick's Tavern a satellite campus next week?
Don't think so.
Right.
That is a retail establishment, therefore it would not qualify.
Can you speak to Canadian licenses?
Not for performing rights. That's outside of my expertise. Deanna, how far do you dip into?
Well, SOCAN is a different animal, and I wouldn't begin to want to try to speak into that.
But there's one performing rights organization in Canada,
right,
for the most part. True. In the United States, we have 3. So thankfully, you've got
plus
one organization theoretically to get public performance licensed in. So that's a little bit easier.
And I will mention this one thing. Oftentimes there are international songs that were created internationally. Many of those publishers affiliate with a U.S. PRO. So just because the song may have been created in the UK or Ireland, that doesn't mean that they're not affiliated with a U.S. PRO, Performance Rights Organization.
All right. JLo, you got another one for us?
From Mike Morse in Bethesda, Maryland. Please talk about the reporting requirements and how does it work? How do you do the reporting? How do you tell if CCS covers a song?
Deanna, you're much better versed with the reporting for CCS. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. CCS is an online reporting requirement. You can report weekly, monthly, or quarterly. We report them or submit them to the performance rights organizations at the end of each quarter. So the information that's required is how you're streaming it, if it's live or archived, the title of the song, and the authors. Those 3 items are needed. So you can go online and you can post that information.
And it's exclusively for the WorshipCast license.
That's exclusive for the WorshipCast license. It is not required. There is no reporting required for the Perform Music license at all. The PROs have told us that they take our reporting for the streaming license and they source that out with the Perform Music license, use that information as a proxy. I'm sorry, there were other parts of that question that I...
Yes, it was how do you tell if CCS covers a song, but I believe that it was mentioned earlier that there's a place on the website to do a search.
There's actually in the middle of the website, ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC are noted. And they're linked directly to the repertory pages of each of the performance rights organizations. ASCAP and BMI have unified. So if you go to ASCAP or BMI, you're going to end up in the same song view repertory lookout, and you can search both of those repertories with that one function, or in that one song view search.
I'm just looking through because some of these questions have been answered.
I thought I saw Leo's hand up.
But people are putting them in the box. I'm reading from a box.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, I was just going to go to the point that somebody was asking about it non-US. So we have PRS in the UK. PRS cover everything. And then we've got, we have 2 licenses, one for the copyright license and one for the live streaming license, one for the live event license. Also in the world that I work in, we have something for the Jewish licenses. It's called J license, which covers literally, it's almost an identical swap over. So what we do in everything is we recommend that when they do live streaming, they put out the J license, they put their J license on a page as they go out. So it's in the liturgy somewhere there. And then on the point that is asked we get asked many times about what happens about takedown on Facebook and on YouTube. I haven't for a long time experienced a live takedown anymore. So live events or live services actually do play and go all the way through, but the replay of it at a later date is likely to have a section muted now.
Which platform?
On both now mute.
Both
Facebook and YouTube will mute after the event. So it won't on the live. We literally have not seen it happen on the live anymore. So they sort of like let that go. But if you go and watch it afterwards, you'll get a copyright notice, and it'll tell you that this copyright notice doesn't affect your rights. You're not got a strike as such. They don't strike you anymore, but they tell you that adverts could be played against this, or they'll mute it. If I'm right, I think Facebook does the mute and YouTube does the adverts, but it won't affect. If you're worried about it affecting your live services, it won't affect during the live service, but you still need to put the license in there.
We always recommend for CCLI churches to include in the description for their event, let's say it's on YouTube, just the description for that video includes some license information, just to show that church stream or that video, there is a license that has been secured for that activity. And we've been, the feedback has been that is helpful, but I don't know how YouTube or Facebook reviews that. That's not clear to us.
All right, want to take another one?
Well, I'll ask, should a church have both CCLI and one license? I don't know what one license refers to.
It all boils down to really repertoire. One license is going to have a lot of traditional and specifically Catholic repertoire. Much of one license, I mentioned that one license is both a publisher and a licensing company. They don't make their works that they publish available to CCLI. So they put, there's cases where churches do have to choose between the more contemporary sort of repertoire that CCLI represents. And if they are using some of that traditional, especially Catholic content, CCLI isn't able to license it. If you're using both, then you need both licenses to cover those reproductions. And if you're streaming, you'd have to have both streaming licenses to cover streaming of those associated works that don't cross over.
That was a good, clear answer. Thank you. Paul G. asks, is any of this licensing happening at the UUA level that we can make use of? That's probably a whole other can of worms, right, Marty?
Yep.
Nice quick answer.
But Tina Boer in Silver Spring had a question. You want to read that one?
Yes. If we had a CCLI Streaming Plus license and we streamed a service and later included a video recording of the service on YouTube, could the content owner still ask us to take down the recording or add ads to the video?
Yes.
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah. That is the liability that you have. You have the rights through a Streaming Plus license from the rights owners to post it on YouTube. But there are some rights owners who they don't allow their content to be placed on YouTube. So even though you have a blanket license that covers it, and theoretically the song that you validated at least has a portion of it that's been approved, it's multifaceted. There could be multiple owners. And when it's placed on a third-party platform like that, it's out of your control, and they most definitely have the rights to place ads or to even take it down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to say that that goes towards the streaming on your own website as a better option.
Yes.
Because I mean the licenses, you're still paying for the license. The license covers that retransmission, but you're not subject to YouTube's terms and conditions.
Yeah. I like to say you control your own destiny a little bit more. You're licensed for both scenarios, but you're just someone else's in control.
There's some sort of kind of overlap and repeat. We were asked, you already, I think, explained what one license is, but somebody wanted to know, is one license a third company separate from CCS and CCLI? And it would be great if you could make a little chart with checkboxes and various licensing companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure that our marketing company has, our marketing department has somewhere some checkboxes that compare and contrast. But one license and CCLI license similar rights, whether it be streaming and making reproductions, recording, displaying lyrics, those sort of things that we covered early on. CCS is a little bit different since CCS is getting the rights directly from the performing rights organizations, not working directly with the rights owners. And their licenses are focused on performance, which neither one license nor CCLI license. And then also worshipcast, which sometimes can be described as a streaming performance or a digital performance. So there is overlap between the three when you get into streaming, but then outside of the streaming part, you have one license and CCLI. There might be other licensing companies. I'm not aware of them. You could license chord charts from Praise Charts or from Multitracks and other locations. And in some of those places, it might be a la carte rather than more of a blanket license. But The main ones that we're aware of would be CCS, as I described, and CCLI in one license.
So there are cases where you might want licenses from both CCLI and CCS, right? So what are the potential costs here? What would churches be looking at in terms of monthly or annual subscription costs or licensing costs?
I'm going to pull up some information on the CCLI website here so I can speak accurately.
Those are all based on what are called tier levels, or your average attendance. So, each with the Perform Music license, absolutely the same as what the chart that Nate's probably pulling up. It's based on the attendance, and
is that online attendance or in-person attendance?
No, this is your average. It's considered your average weekly attendance for your facility. True enough. And if it's talking about in regular situations, not during COVID time.
COVID.
So you can't say I have 5 people in attendance.
Right.
That you of course wouldn't do that. But the average for CCS, the first tier is for 1 to 199, and for the Perform Music license, that's $240, and that's for the performance license. So this is not a streaming license. This is the performance for the facilities and the grounds and your satellite campuses, etc. So then you get into streaming, and that adds different licensing. Nate, you want to talk about the CCLI?
Yeah, and it's exactly as Deanna described. It's based on church size. I think 80% of CCLI churches are 200 and under. So the vast majority of the customers or churches that we serve are smaller. It's not the mega, 20, 30,000 size, though we have many of those. But if we're looking at, let's say, a church that's 100 or below in average weekly attendance, the CCL, or the church copyright license, is $137. Streaming, and this is for the year, streaming would be $68 for the year. If you were doing streaming plus, it's going to be roughly, it would be around, I think, $200 for both streaming and streaming plus. So if you're doing streaming plus, and a reproduction license, church copyright license, you're probably just over $300 for the year. All of this information is available on our website. So your best option is to go and look at pricing and just start to figure out what it would look like. We recognize that for churches, especially during these times, they're trying to make decisions between electricity bills, and for pastors, it's putting food on the table. Do we really want to secure licensing and get our piece of paper, so to speak? But we try to keep the license costs fair, and so it's transparent. You'll be able to see it on the website.
And true enough, there are many churches that will have multiple licenses, even in the streaming environment. They will have the CCLI license for their regular services, so they can project their lyrics during their services, and they will have the WorshipCast license so they can have their events. They could stream their barbecue or the concert outside, or the youth event, or award ceremonies, that type of thing. So they do a combination of these things. The thing that you do have to keep in mind, of course, is that if you're streaming with WorshipCast, you can't stream lyrics. If you're streaming with the CCLI license in your service, of course you can. So, there's different restrictions that you need to keep in mind for the event that you happen to be streaming. And of course, we didn't talk about CCLI reporting. That is much more limited than the requirement of the worship cast reporting. So, Nate, that happens every 2.5 years.
Yeah, in North America, due to the number of churches that are licensed, we're able to make the requirement every 2.5 years for a 6-month period. A church reports their reproductions under the church copyright license. That also allows them to report for their streaming in that. With the introduction of the new master recording streaming license, Streaming Plus, you are reporting those master recordings or multi-tracks, whatever audio you're using year-round. But the interval with which you kind of true up, we'd recommend that you do it on a weekly basis, just so that it's fresh and you can remember what you used. Mm-hmm. But we see many cases where churches will kind of keep a log and then do it right towards the end of the reporting period.
All right, so Carolyn is asking for a clarification. So it's very common for churches to run some sort of a coffee house, series where they'll invite bands to come in and play. And the question relates to, is there any restrictions about what these bands can play? Because you don't often get a set list in advance, right?
So is this at the church, location?
Yes. Yes.
So you have to establish whether this, first off, is considered a service or not a service.
Not a service.
And if it's not a service, well then that band, they're going to be playing tracks that are, or songs that are most likely covered by the performing rights organizations. I would feel very comfortable in that scenario if the church had a perform music facilities license, that they would be covered, because that's a public performance outside of a church service, so to speak. Anything that would need to be reported for public performance in the United States would theoretically be registered under the 3 PROs, performing rights organizations, and available to report against. Actually, you don't have to report under perform music, so just come and that band can play away and you can have a great time sipping coffee.
Right. One caveat to that is that the performance rights organizations do require that this coffee shop not be a retail establishment. It can't be, you can't just pull in the Starbucks and say we're gonna claim this for our coffee shop today. It needs to be on the church premises. It needs to be a sanction of the church.
And what if goods are sold at the performance? That doesn't make it retail, correct?
If you're selling, Twinkies
and food,
I think that's, as long as it's not a retail establishment.
right? It's
Nate,
still
did
the
you
church
have?
building.
I was just starting to think about the, tickets for entry sort of thing. That's where the dynamic changes a little bit. But if you're selling, refreshments and coffee and other things, then.
So how do tickets change that scenario? Selling tickets to a performance.
Well, if you're talking about the perform music license, so we're not talking about streaming, we're talking about the perform music license in person. So that is what would be considered a ticketed event. And that is a requirement to report that as a separate item. With the perform music license, you do have the ability to fill out the ticketed event form. You send that in and it's billed separately. There are some various structure, but it's depending on the size of the facility, how many tickets you sell, and how much each ticket cost, that type of thing.
It's kind of an add-on, so to speak.
It is.
But so it's the key differentiator is, are you charging a fee to attend this performance in the coffee shop or at the church,
Now, okay, I'm going to get into the sticky part. What's the difference between selling tickets and accepting donations?
Great question.
Nicely done, Marty.
Great question. The difference is for you to get in, you have to pay. The donation is if they come in and you have a hat or you pass the plate, so to speak, that's a donation. You can't require a particular amount. You know, you can't say,
Suggested
well,
donation.
yes, we can't say we'll let you in for a donation, but that donation should be $10. You have to allow that to be a donation, an at-will donation. I'm going to jump over here to the streaming just because it is very contrasted. With a streaming event, you are not allowed to take funds. You are not allowed to sell tickets. And there cannot be a cost to view that stream.
And it would be the same on the CCLI side. We're not talking about performance though, but there's event licensing that can take place and you can stream events. Typically that's where it would be larger than your normal church's congregation size. So you're flexing your licensing to accommodate the larger group. Once you introduce a fee, you can't stream. You just
Okay,
can't do it.
and let me just highlight one distinction. I'm hoping you'll agree with. If your concert is an artist performing their own material, then
So theoretically, that artist can perform their own material and they're licensing it to you directly in that environment. There's no outside licensing required.
Right.
They could say my licensing fee is $10 for the night, or for me, it would be a nice warm caramel mocha with a couple extra shots. And
Cool.
You've secured the rights. You can have Nate on the drums and he'll play solos all night.
Now Crystal has a good question.
Should I read it?
Well, I mean, I threw it in there so you could do that.
You can read it, Chris.
Okay. Give me a second to throw myself into the spotlight here. Woo! Because I'm on a different screen. Okay, question number 1 regarding satellite campuses, because you guys kind of touched on the retail situation. What if it's say a satellite congregation that is renting a separate retail, like they have a back room in a retail space, like a restaurant or an art gallery or whatever, that is solely for their use. It is rented, paid for weekly. It's not public. Is that considered okay? Even though
Absolutely.
it's in a rental? Okay, just wanted to make sure on that.
Absolutely. Now, I would say let's overshy that. Let's umbrella that with the fact that the satellite campus should be under the 501c3 or the budget, so to speak, of that primary license holder. They, of course, if you're an individual church and you rent retail space, you can get a performance music license as well. Doesn't have to be a satellite campus.
So basically, if you're in a small congregation, you're starting out, you rent a retail space and make that your congregational space. That's cool. Okay, great. So that's awesome.
Deanna, aren't they trying to avoid a coffee shop or something that would normally purchase licensing direct from a PRO, from being able to kind of slide in and fall under this church's licensing for a period of time?
Right. And we have had a couple of things like that happen, of course, where the Joe's Coffee House they got a PM license to eliminate having to get the retail licensing. And that's not acceptable. The church can have the back room and they can be licensed, but not in place of Joe's retail license.
Understood. And thank you for the clarification. The second part of this was regarding music, and this kind of ties into a question somebody else has asked, actually a couple of them. With regard to music that is from a theatrical work, like say a musical play, but it's a piece of music that is licensed within one of the three main URSPROs. So like say Bye Bye Birdie has a lot of songs that are 100% ASCAP. Are those acceptable, even though they are technically from a dramatic musical work? Or are they pretty much off limits because of the other? That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, Dion, I'm looking at you, but I have not run into this scenario before. But here's what I would expect: your perform music license is going to cover that performance. Now, in this case, you don't need an exemption because you've purchased the appropriate licensing, and that licensing for public performance is going to cover a vast array of different types of places where you could perform it, including within a church. So you're kind of getting around, if it's not a drama, a song from a drama, then you wouldn't need additional licensing, but you're purchasing licensing, so you're going to be covered.
Cool. Thank you very much.
The individual song would absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So at this point, we're going to take a pause. We're going to move into the post show, which is a less formal conversation. But for right now, so, hang around, guys, if you want to ask more questions. But at this point, I'd like to thank our panelists and our special guests for such a really wonderful conversation. This has been, I expected this to be a very deep, technical conversation, and it has been. But it's actually been very enlightening because it's such a confusing topic, and there's so much to it. So we hope that you've all enjoyed our time together. Perhaps you found it informative and enlightening, enriching, energizing, and motivating. Watch the Discord for agendas for upcoming shows. Next week, we get technical in a different way. We go into sound. And you'll also find on the Discord where you can find recordings of the past shows, including this one, in a few days, as soon as I can get it done. Announcements about other upcoming shows, announcements about the needs assessment contest, which ended today. We have some really, really good entries from churches. I'm very impressed with the information that was provided. It's going to make our jobs to select the winners more challenging than I thought, but hey, we're up for it.